or chime in when you see relevant. When we start the discussion, you can chime in on with your question, and then we will go make it more informal and then more useful discussion for our Nepali context that soil health management, some of the initiatives the country have taken, and then some of the more work we need to do to attain those sustainable development goals, soil health goals, or carbon neutrality, carbon negative agriculture in Nepal. So first, I would like to start with my first question to Dr. Bajracharya. You work with Dr. Lal for a little bit. You hear maybe some of the refreshing talks from this today's presentation, and then yourself, your dedication, your long experience working in Nepal. Like earlier in the informal session, we discussed, almost like 20 years ago, we meet as a student, and today I'm seeing you on this panel, that your experience working on this field. What are your thoughts on a role of sustainable role of soil management in climate mitigation and adaptation? First part. And then second, how countries like Nepal can benefit from some of these sustainable, climate smart, negative emissions agriculture or nature-centric agriculture. Dr. Lal used different terminology. So from these practices or regenerative agriculture, how can we benefit from this? Sir, you are muted.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Gimire. First of all, I'd like to start with a bit of background. I returned to Nepal in 1998 after having spent, well, most of my life actually in the US and other places, India. And so first of all, I wanted to understand what is the status and the situation of soils and agriculture in Nepal. So through a lot of extensive literature surveys, as well as visits to many districts and conducting some of my own research, I've found, especially through much of the research done by the NARC and the regional agriculture research centers, that the soil fertility and nutrient availability status of many of the soils across Nepal, especially the mid-hills and lower plains region, Tarai, are rather low. Low to medium is the status of most of the nutrients found. So this is from studies conducted from the 80s through to 2000s. And we see that some micronutrients especially are particularly deficient, especially zinc, boron, molybdenum. And that's partly because of the nature of the farming, especially paddy cultivation, rice cultivation. Of course, our traditional agriculture has not used as much of chemical fertilizers as many parts of the world. In fact, until the 90s and early 2000s, probably there was very little use of chemical fertilizers. But obviously, this use of chemical fertilizers has increased over the past 2-3 decades. So there's a greater reliance on chemical fertilizers for increasing productivity. However, if we look at across the average yields in many of these districts, and particularly in the mid-hills, we find that the yields are still quite low. Their average yields are very low, especially for some of the staple crops, wheat, rice, maize, millet, and so forth. Of course, there has been a more recent trend, like since the 2000s, where farmers, particularly near this Kathmandu Valley, in and around the Kathmandu Valley, have been incorporating vegetable crops. So those are some positive trends, I think. But based on the situation where we have a low fertility status of the soil in many areas, we definitely need to go towards more of a soil restorative farming practices. Okay, just as Professor Lal has said, uh, the regenerative approach, which involves restoring the soil back to its original fertility, can be done largely by increasing the soil organic matter content, which naturally means that you are going to increase the biodiversity, the microbial activity, and that should lead to more readily available nutrients for crops with less need for applying chemical fertilizers. So that approach needs to be taken, definitely. And I find that there are a number of different practices that should be practiced in order to achieve a sustainable agriculture or sustainable farming systems. And one is, of course, diversification of agriculture. So in other words, we should not rely on monocrop agriculture where we're producing large areas of single crops, right? So in fact, if we look at our traditional agriculture, there used to be always a mixed cropping system, whereby you have some grain crops interspersed with fodder species of trees, shrubs, as well as some other vegetable crops and things which are mostly consumed in the farming household itself. So in other words, there has been a shift from this mixed and holistic type of farming where it's more to provide the necessary food for the farming communities themselves to more of a commercial sort of agriculture whereby they're trying to produce large amounts of grains which are then sold in the market. So this shift has also caused great depletion of soil nutrients and a gradual degradation of the soil fertility status. So particularly for the mid-hill areas where I've done most of the work, I feel that agroforestry systems are indeed very suitable. First and foremost, because we are dealing with very steep slopes, and even terracing does not adequately curtail the soil erosion processes on these steep slopes, where we're looking at 30 to 50% slopes. So the terraces themselves do not lend themselves to easy farming practices, right? So you cannot mechanize on very narrow terraces with steep slopes. So agroforestry systems hold, I think, the most promise. So from a number of studies conducted by some of my students, we found that agroforestry systems that include horticultural crops, fruit trees, fodder species, which helps to diversify the farming. So you are providing, food for livestock and animals, as well as getting some productivity for the farming households as well. So agroforestry systems with diversified cropping, and particularly including some medicinal plants, could also be of very good approach, because these are high value crops which can give good return with fairly small amounts of production, right? So these sort of systems are very critical, I think, especially in hill regions. Of course, in the Tarai also, there is scope for some holistic management and regenerative approaches to agriculture. So these could include systems such as agro-silvipastoral systems, or alley cropping with some permaculture with trees and other permanent plants. And of course, there's also good potential for aquaculture and aquaponics. So as Professor Lal mentioned, the land being limited and our need to return some of that land back to natural processes, natural ecosystems, one approach is to increase farming without soil. Right? So this is especially relevant to urban areas and urban centers where, of course, there's very little land for farming. You can do hydroponics, aquaponics, and aquaculture. So these are some possibilities as well. And of course, there's a definite benefit to adopting these sustainable and regenerative farming practices. Firstly, we'll be moving towards a more carbon neutral farming system. The returns should also benefit the farmers because they're getting a more balanced and dietarily nutritive sort of farming systems. Of course, the demand for food will continue to increase because population continues to increase. But as Professor Lal mentioned, if we can increase the output from the same parcel of land by doubling or tripling the yield, then we should be able to meet those demands in future. And because Nepal itself is a very low emitter, as of now, a low emitter of carbon, we need to be able to capitalize on carbon credits. So that's another aspect, but that will require, of course, much more international cooperation, policy initiatives, and negotiation in the international stage, I would say. So let me stop at
Thank
this
you,
point and
sir.
we'll take
Maybe
up other questions as you go.
sure. Yeah, I have very short, supplemental question. This is very good. That I did myself. I did some research in Nuwakot and Chittagong districts around 2009-10, and then we could see agricultural land. As compared to nearby forest, we see significant depletion in carbon storage while following this more integrated farming or agroforestry based farming system. At least we can 20 to 30% more carbon storage, and then a little bit improvement in soil pH condition because our mountains are uh, really a high acidity problem. So these are good, but sir, I just want your short perspective that we are moving more chemical intensive, some commercial agriculture. Do you see these big scale farming adopting more this eco-intensive or sustainable intensification approach, or we are going on the same cycle of this Western agriculture where once we started modernizing that seed-centric approach or maximizing yield approach or ecological intensification. Do you see enough effort on their part on the big scale agriculture?
Well, again, this regulating the farming system and agricultural production will, to a large extent, depend on policies and political will, as Professor Lal has already mentioned. Although, of course, it is also in the best interest of commercial farmers to maintain the fertility and productivity of the soil, right? Because if the very resource on which they depend becomes depleted and the yields keep going down, then that farming system will no longer be sustainable. So there's no doubt that we have to adopt sustainable approaches. How that can be done is really, up to a kind of integration of both the technological aspect as well as the policy aspects. Although I've noticed in and around the Kathmandu Valley area at least that commercial farmers are going more and more to this plastic or greenhouse type, plastic house type of production, whereby they are planting a number of different crops within the cropping cycle. So it's not only your typical two rice wheat or rice potatoes or that, but they're going to more high value vegetable, tomatoes, other types of high value crops, and doing it in these plastic tunnels so that the amount of land used is quite nominal. It's a small amount of land, but they're producing high amount from those small amounts of land. So the key question is whether they're relying entirely on chemical fertilization or whether they're going to more sustainable and more restorative sort of options, such as organic fertilizers, compost, and biochar could be a very important factor, especially in these acidic soils. So these are some areas where some of my students have conducted research, and biochar is in fact a very potential because it has a high pH, 9 to 10. So adding even small amounts to the soil can help increase the pH levels.
Very good. Thank you. Yeah, I will now move into another question with Dr. Srestha, but Keshav Bhatrai sir have raised his hand. Sir, do you have any question to Dr. Bajracharya?
I think after the panel discussion, we'll have general audience will have the opportunity. Therefore, I'm waiting for that. And Dr. Nityananda has at the beginning announced the housekeeping rules. So I just raised the hand and I'll wait until the panel finishes.
Okay, thank you. Then we'll make a note of that. Thank you, Dr. Shrestha. Dr. Bajracharya mentioned just the policy and practice. Both need to go hand in hand. You have years of experience working on policy front. As well as research and other front, but I think your stronghold in the policy experience from your engagement on U.S. and global projects. What policy and practice gaps do you see in developing countries like Nepal? And what do you see the prospect of developing policies to support these practices?
Thank you, Dr. Kimide, for this very thought-provoking question. First, सबैलाई नमस्कार. मेरो यहाँ Virginiaबाट. I hope everyone is safe. If you're in Nepal or somewhere in the US that's impacted by the floods, there's so much to talk about. So maybe the next NAPA webinar can talk about disasters. This is such an excellent question, especially during this time when many parts of Nepal flood disasters are destroying our soil there. And think about the care and attention that farmers and local governments, national government, and all our friends of Nepal, all the years maybe of work they've done on the soil in Nepal, and with a disaster like this, this brings a big question mark. And we can talk about research, we can talk about mitigation, soil health, restoration, everything, but then a disaster strikes, and then so this is really so regarding policy gaps. So this is in a situation like this, I would just stress that there is a need to create a safety net among all the policy making and policy implementing institutions in any country, and that includes Nepal. So my personal experience, again, for this webinar's purpose, I'm not representing my employer, my agency, so I'm not representing any of my former or current affiliations. So this is just my personal view. So my experience working in the last 14 years, working with the US government agencies, has taught me the significance of preparation and of constant information exchange among different government agencies and among different researchers in the climate change sector and all the stakeholders in the climate change sector, in order to be able to strategically plan for the next 3, 4, 5, 10, 50 years in response to the projected risks and the projected changes that are coming, that are going to be impacting everyone because of climate change. And so with the example of carbon, and soil carbon, for instance, I think Nepal has come a long way since the last 30, 20 years ago. There's been a lot of progress. We have esteemed scientists like Dr. Bajracharya and many of you who are in this audience today, who have really helped to launch the current, I would say, progress that we have in the science, in the science sector, in the soil science sector, in the climate change sector. And I'm a bit curious, and I hope we can have some discussion about this later. You know, how do you feel yourselves? The science that you know that's being generated is being used by the government in Nepal and by the different stakeholders and organizations in Nepal. So going back to Dr. Kimire's question, based on my own experience, I would say that we really need to go beyond research and go beyond again, this might be very controversial, but go beyond thinking about just donor organizations and just going beyond INGOs and what they want, and then think about what Nepal wants, what the Nepali farmer wants, what the local communities want, and really bring everyone, bring all the farmers and all the local communities, bring them in the room and in the research sector, really to train and to empower them to conduct research in the carbon sector themselves. And going beyond research, really empower and train them to do research, development, demonstration, and deployment of different carbon removal technologies. And I'm going to give two examples. For instance, Dr. Bhattacharya mentioned biochar, and that was actually my PhD research over 15 years ago. So I have a lot to say about that. And I see that in Nepal, there's been some very promising research, including by Dr. Bhattacharya's team, on how biochar could be used to effectively and efficiently remove carbon and also improve the soil health. I'm interested in learning and also in hearing from others how the biochar industry is prospering or not prospering in Nepal. And this one example is very important because biochar is in the US and around the world is being promoted as, you know, a major carbon removal solution, and millions of dollars are being invested in biochar companies that are conducting research and also working with farmers in India and other parts of the world. So these farmers and these different communities are actually being paid to produce biochar and to improve the quality of their soil, and also to they get paid for the carbon that's being stored and for the long term. And so this goes beyond this one-time money that's coming from an international NGO or a funder. This really goes into training these local farmers to really scale up to the technologies to produce to remove carbon. And it's the farmers, it's the local business people. So it's this large private sector group that's closely invests. And in all these interactions, really paying attention to the fact that no one should be exploited. So, like, for instance, if someone's paying $100 per ton of carbon captured through this process, then, making sure that the actual farmers and the actual local communities are gaining most of the benefit from those $100, and not just, getting some token amount of money or some token gift. So there's people are paying a lot of attention to these kinds of interactions and how the money is being used. So really, I would say, based on my experience, that's one comment that I would make, that Nepal, I mean, there's a huge potential in Nepal for some long-term carbon removal industry. And so my background, again, I was going to say, for 11 years, I was serving as the director of the Interagency U.S. Carbon Cycle Science Program Office. And in that role, I also had the privilege to interact with a much broader climate change coordination body in the US for all those years. And the way this would work is, at least in my case with the carbon people, I would convene all the different program managers who fund research in carbon cycle science. I would convene them regularly, once a month, at least, even once a week sometimes, and everybody would exchange information on what the different government agencies are doing in terms of the different research areas that are being funded, and the different research advances and the different gaps and opportunities that are coming up as a result of the research that's being funded, and what else can be done, so on and so forth. And so this would lead into coordinated research opportunities that would be advertised. And so anyone could apply to those research opportunities. And then this leads to more, I would say, to the advancement of the science of carbon and climate change. And all this really informs the different priorities of the US government. And this in turn informs, you know, the decadal planning and the implementation of the different science products that are being funded by the US government. So I'm interested in learning with Nepal, you know, what is currently being done in this sector, and how can we, I would say, you know, how can we as, you know, global citizens and also, you know, colleagues who are originally from Nepal, how can we help, so on and so forth.
Thank you very much. I think few takeaways from your thoughts. People-centric policy is really important, you know, and in which I also agree that you know, there's carbon policies, a lot of discussion going on. Based on my limited involvement in some of the, you know, soil science society discussions or some other policy forums at the state level, you know, that is the biggest challenge here. Then how to, you know, Nepal can build on those policies that benefit you know, the people there. You know, we need to really think that not like you know, other, you know, outsider, our you know, small scale farmers, how can they benefit, and then this interagency collaboration and then interagency dialogue. I think that is more important. You know, different sectors within Nepal. I think I like that idea also, and then equitable distribution of those benefits. Now, carbon credit program is providing benefit, but here in US also, you know, a lot of discussion is going on who is the ultimate beneficiary, because the carbon credit are produced in the grassroots level, and but you know, there is a lot of you know, middleman type of you know, other agencies working on behalf of, you know, getting those benefits. So that is very good thoughts. I think Nepal can benefit from some of these policy dialogues, you know, looking into all these aspects. Now I would like to go back, you know, hear more from Nepal. Roshan sir, you again, you know, since you have been working on like biochar, you know, some of the other frontier technologies that sequester carbon, or some other you know, more regenerative practices, and then also continuously involved in educating generations of scientists in this side. What do you see the biggest barrier to adopting sustainable soil management practices, regenerative practices? And then on the education side, what are the biggest barrier that we cannot go upfront into these nature-centric approach in carbon management, soil health management? What do you have experienced in these many years of working? And then how what could be the ways to overcome those challenges? Your thoughts on both barriers and challenges.
Yes, well, in many of my extensive visits to various districts across the country, I found that I think one of the biggest problems for farmers to adopt new technologies and to become aware about the status of soils and fertility, or even to know what the status of their particular farms are, is I think there's really a lack of an extension arm in our country, in Nepal. While there are district agricultural offices and people at that level, but there's really a lack of an extension whereby experts go periodically to the various communities, farming communities, and try to understand what are the main issues or problems they're facing, and then offer suggestions and ways to rectify the situation. So that's one area where I found was very lacking. Whereas in advanced countries like the US, you really have a big extension arm, particularly in agriculture, whereby you have trained professionals going out to these various farming communities on a regular basis and trying to address the problems and issues they're facing. Here in Nepal, we really lack that sort of approach. And as already mentioned by Dr. Shesha and others, there is very much of a lack of coordination among the various government agencies and departments that are dealing with agriculture or climate change. So those sort of situation is, I think, the biggest barrier for farmers. As I mentioned before, the traditional practices and the way that farmers have been conducting or doing their farming practices from generations past has generally been very ecologically friendly or eco-friendly and environment friendly. The newer demands, the commercialization of agriculture and the more intensive production of certain crops that have higher demand. So, the market is controlling that demand and supply situation. So that has become less sustainable, right? So that's leading to a depletion of the soil nutrients, leading to a gradual decline in the fertility and productivity status of the soils. So these need to be tackled both at a policy level, but also providing the necessary extension and technical support to farmers so that they can become aware of what are the possible options, what sorts of practices they can adopt, which would be beneficial to them as well as to the natural environment. So that sort of coordination between the experts, the government agencies, and the local farmers and the stakeholders, that I think needs to be improved as one of the primary barriers towards adopting sustainable practices.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you very much, sir. And then another major discussion, I see lack of extension, policy and coordination. Again, those are the biggest barriers, as you mentioned. And here in developed countries like US, in Australia, European Union, they have been working a lot on, carbon market front to really incentivize. I think the terminology they use, putting farmers in as a part of the climate change solution, to incentivize them through compliance market, through the state or federal government, regulated market, mostly the state regulated markets in some of the states in US, and then voluntary carbon market, the private party, working on the carbon market side. So that is there is a lot of discussion going on, a lot of new companies, and then some established ecosystem services companies. They are working to develop that competitive market in these countries. have we have any discussion in Nepal on that front? Maybe for example, Dr. Lal mentioned, in US, $50 per carbon credit. That means if you sequester carbon, 1 ton of carbon in 1 acre, then you can get $50 incentive for that acres. So is there any discussion in Nepal if we can implement this carbon market and then get benefit from regenerative practices in Nepal?
Well, actually, I'm not aware of any programs that have actually delivered or paid on carbon credits to farmers in Nepal, at least. And the biggest problem in order to do this is that there is nobody to certify how much has a farmer or a given community sequestered carbon, right? So you need a system where you can measure and verify how much carbon has been sequestered. So without a system like that in place, how do you translate that into a credit, and then how does the farmer or the community get paid, right? So I think at this point, yes, the topic has come up in a lot of discussion, especially in these national programs for climate adaptation, NAPA, LAPA, and those sort of things. But the actual implementation of paying farmers for sequestering or for carbon capture has, as far as I know, has not yet been implemented in Nepal. Maybe some of the other participants are aware if they're working more closely with the government departments. But at least I'm not aware of any of these programs that have actually been implemented.
Yeah, good. Yeah, thank you, sir. That is at least like, some discussion on higher level in the government level, Department of Agriculture, NARC, and then universities, if we start the discussion. That is great. I would like to go back to Dr. Shrestha on this carbon market question. I am not quite sure how much you have been involved on these on this aspect, but I see small scale agriculture have its own opportunity and challenge to go on in a multinational carbon market or a small scale national scale carbon market. What do you see? Is agriculture, carbon market really feasible, and then a good option for agriculture in Nepal? Or maybe we need to think some other sectors like forestry. We discuss a lot. Some other land use sectors we are talking a lot. So, can you give your thoughts about carbon market? Feasibility of carbon market in Nepali context.
Sure, Dr. Ghimire. Again, I'm not a carbon market expert, but I can say a little about the carbon removal industry based on my knowledge of what's happening in the US and in other parts of the world, and based on my ignorance of what's probably not happening in Nepal or probably is happening. So feel free to correct me if it's already happening. So in the US, I think Dr. Lal and others have focused on the term carbon sequestration, which is part of the carbon removal set of technologies and approaches. And when we talk about carbon removal, it's much broader, and it includes technologies that involve the soil, the trees, or some that involve none of them, and some that involve everything. And so biochar is considered one form of carbon removal practice, and then there are others that could be relevant, and very beneficial in Nepal, such as there's crop enhancement, where companies and scientists are developing new varieties of crops and trees that increase carbon sequestration, both in the biomass and also in the soil. And I know that there's always a lot of and there should be a lot of caution regarding any kind of genetically modified plants and letting anyone experiment with such genetically modified species in a country like Nepal. We don't want to be, nobody wants to be taken advantage of if something goes wrong. And I'm actually curious, like, if there's any kind of research on such highly carbon sequestering species in Nepal. And so, and that's an example of one carbon removal technology and approach that might, benefit from that might be of use in Nepal. And then there's also enhanced weathering that I've talked about in some previous conversations, where this is a process where silicate rocks from different mining industries are applied on agricultural lands, in farming areas. And the silicate rocks, when they interact with the rain, they release cations, and they convert the dissolved carbon dioxide into bicarbonate and carbonate anions. And this helps with the acidity in the soils, and ultimately the dissolved bicarbonates and carbonate anions, they get swept away into the water bodies and the oceans. So currently there's the carbon market, I would say, or the carbon removal market for some of these technologies that we call carbon removal technologies. It's really accelerating worldwide. A lot of private sector investments, Microsoft, Google, Amazon, spending, and other investors spending millions of dollars, paying millions of dollars for different companies, for different scientists, for different nonprofits to conduct research and to develop, demonstrate and deploy such technologies, to scale up such technologies. So there's so much money out there that's being spent, and through different types of purchase agreements, for instance. And so, like contracts, carbon offtake agreements that usually, that there are contracts for like 10 to 15 years. And I would say, would that be a gap in Nepal? Are we like is Nepal left behind in this fastly evolving carbon removal industry, carbon removal market? Going beyond research, there is a need for Nepali, I would say, scientists and Nepali government colleagues from local to national, and also different nonprofits and the private sector people, or anyone, young and old, anyone who has a big idea, or who has the energy and enthusiasm to really come together and see how Nepal can take advantage of this growing interest and market in carbon removal for different types of technologies that involve soil, that involves trees, that involves agroforestry. It's not given the climate change that everybody's experiencing. We need to use all the technologies and all the approaches that we have together. We cannot just say, oh, I'm just going to do soil carbon market, or I'm just going to be doing soil tree carbon market. Everything has to be thought together, and making sure that we're not harming the environment, making it worse, of course. And I would I would say we need to think. Everybody needs to think big, think beyond their particular scope of the research, or their particular market sector. Really thinking big and really reaching out to all these investors who want to do good. Really, they lots of them are doing this because of their climate commitments, but lots of them also want to do good in this world and solve climate change.
Yeah, thank you very much. I think this is very good, insightful discussion from both Dr. Vajracharya and Dr. Shrestha. I would like to take that point. All these big companies, national, multinational companies are interested in buying carbon credits, and definitely the countries like Nepal even half or quarter of that $50 or $30 they are talking, if we can get some benefits from those incentives, that could really help our farmers and then other sectors. I really like that idea. With that, we have done with our planned questions. I don't have any more questions, but we will learn more about what is happening in Nepal. I see several experienced policy, research, education people involved on all these three fronts from Nepal also joining, and then other people who have been actively involved working on Nepal. So with this formal question answer session ending, I would like to hand over to Dr. Nityananda Khanal or Dr. Shrestha, Bharat Shrestha, to take over this.
Thank you very much, panelists, Dr. Bajracharya, Dr. Shrestha, and Dr. Gimere for thought-provoking panel discussion. I feel
Sir,
that
can you speak a little bit louder?
So you hear me all right? No? Okay, great. So yeah, I feel that we need to pursue this discourse through various NAPA forums. And with that, now I'd like to request Dr. Subodh Adhikari and Dr. Bharat Shrestha to facilitate question and answer session. Dr. Adhikari and Shrestha, please.
Yeah, not sure how much time we have for that, but I think we should try to expedite or accommodate at least some questions. We can go with the Keshav sir first. We saw your hand raised, and then we can go to the chat.
नमस्कार सबैलाई मेरो क्वेसन त my question is to Dr. Lal, but he is not here. So can I put my curiosity?
Of course.
Okay. A few slides like absorptive roots versus transportative roots, depth distribution of root input, living in the deep root systems, and then taking that into transformative strategies, that is from 5DS to 4RS. That means the 5DS means deplete, degrade, destroy, discard, dominate. 2, reduce, reuse, recycle, regenerate, and restore. And then he also introduced that SDGs 1 to 6, 13, 15. And then finally, he also presented that the proper soil conservation can contribute to restore 333 picogram of carbon dioxide. So all this that said, that he also demonstrated one root system, so that is rather than the shallow root system, the deep rooted systems. I wonder if agriculturist understands. I am not an agriculturist, and so therefore this is my curiosity. I am a geographer, and I look from the urban perspective and what I see. I wonder if this soil science has some solutions to urbanizations, that since 2007, the urban population is exceeding the rural population. By 2050, 75% of the total populations will reside in the urban areas. That is what said. And Dr. Lal also said that our strategy is to go to vertical farming and use less land, and produce more. So our scientists working to find out some deep-rooted trees, and because planting trees in the urban areas for greenery purposes, they are blocking the pipes. And there have been a lot of pipe blockage, the drainage blockage in the various homes. And so these have been a big problem in urban planning. I wonder if there is any solutions that the agriculturists are thinking and developing some types of the trees that will penetrate into the deeper layer and avoid and leave a lot of spaces for other agricultural crops for vertical farming in the urban areas. That is my question. Thank you.
Thank you, Keshav sir. I think we could probably go back to the panel for this question briefly. Dr. Bajracharya, Dr. Gimre, Dr. Shrestha, if you have anything to say. If not, we can move on to next question.
Maybe I can start a little bit. This four or 5D to 5R, and then this deep-rooted system, sustainable, SDG 1, 2, 6, 13, 15. I'm not sure which one of those, but that is, out of those 15 UN Sustainable Development Goal. If you look at goal 1, 2, I think he is referring to those. And then this all relates to, this regenerative, nature-centric, all these practices. Then specifically, these deep-rooted system. Now, a lot of work is going on specifically in US. For example, even in my research group, we are looking at a perennial versus annual cropping. In US, if we look at different crops, they are working on perennial wheat. So that after you harvest wheat, it regenerates, root growth grows back, above ground plant grows back, so that you don't have to cultivate every year, but you can get yield, and then soil is continuously feeding, so that the sequestration or carbon cycling is continue to happen in soil. Perennial sorghum is already on the market, at least on the testing phase. Perennial canola, perennial sunflower. We are working on some of those, but in US the work is happening. I was earlier, participating in one of the USDA forum, and then I learned that scientists in US are working on a perennial maize. After we harvest corn or maize, then they are working to develop those. So a lot of work is happening, and then they consider these, perennial cropping, biochar application, these kind of techniques. Or earlier, Dr. Shrestha mentioned this, using rocks, silicate rocks to amend soil. Those are called transformative, agriculture technologies, or frontier carbon management technologies that can support food security, at the same time improve, climate resiliency. So that is one. And then all these regenerative techniques here, a lot of research work is happening in different parts. But I think when you think of Nepal, we need to work on those technologies, techniques. For example, biochar work, we have been working quite a bit on biochar front. Maybe we need to push those kind of technologies and then try to get benefit from those. But I will stop here.
Yeah, I think I just want to add that
Dr.
the question
Shrestha.
was about urban areas. So I think in urban areas, of course, maintenance of green belts and open spaces where you can have greenery and trees and shrubs and grass. Even it doesn't necessarily have to be only trees with their deep root systems, but you can have open spaces with grass, which could ultimately lead to net carbon sequestration, because even the annual plants like grasses have root systems that are replaced every year. So those roots will ultimately contribute to the soil organic carbon. And if that can be retained in the soil, so long as the soil is not disturbed, plowed, and dug up, then that carbon should remain within the soil profile, and that adds to the carbon sequestration. So I think so for urban areas, it's not only trees, but other green belts and green spaces with lots of diverse type of plants, right? So you can have gardens, flowering plants, grasses, and so forth. I think that could be part of the solution for some of these issues with the tree roots penetrating into drainage systems and pipes.
Great. Thank you. I'm afraid we are going well beyond our time, but I still would like to take one question from chat, a representative question from Alina Porter. In Nepal, application of biochar has been just like emerging topic, but only farmers are not really using just under the research right now. So how can we create awareness and promote farmers to make or use biochar for soil management? Are there any policies or programs that will prioritize the use of biochar in farmers' land in the near future? Probably panel or any of other people.
Okay, let me just add, well, as I said, we had number of students working on biochar, and we went to different districts and villages, and we had these portable small biochar stoves. The point that we wanted to emphasize was that the biochar should be produced from only waste biomass. Okay, so on every farm, you have lots of organic residues that are simply discarded or composted or not used in any productive way. So for those sort of waste biomass, it could be litter from the, from the nearby wood lots, or just simply the crop residues that are harvested and thrown out. So those waste biomass can be converted to biochar. And again, the idea is to use whatever locally available energy source inputs, so not simply fuel wood from the forests. We don't want to deplete the forests or do further deforestation. So using whatever waste biomass to produce the biochar, but that again would be on a very small scale. So individual farmers in these small farming communities could use those approaches. But in order for it to be effective, I think we also need larger scale biochar production. And for that, again, the private sector should have to be involved. And also there needs to be appropriate policies and policy incentives for both the farmers as well as private sector to take up some of these biochar making activities. So I think as yet there's still a very lack in the policy direction for incorporating these sort of innovative new technologies in Nepal.
Great. We saw Dr. Vishnu Upreti's hand raised before.
Yeah, he doesn't seem to be here.
Okay.
So yeah, just I'd like to give 1 minute comment opportunity for Gopi sir. He wishes to have a comment. Go ahead, please, Gopi sir.
Namaskar to everybody over here. Well, this is one of the best webinar that we had here, and thank you very much for organizing this. I don't have anything here, but I would have been very happy to see Professor Lal here, at least, because whatever Professor Lal presented today here, that resonates and validates very well with the principles and the issues that I have raised in my own book that is very recently published by Spencer Nature in 2023. Because these principles, Professor Lal, which actually presented, are the principles that are going to be the cornerstone of the paradigm shift for the current from the current present high input agriculture system to a sustainable, more regenerative agriculture system in the future, given the present environmental and climate crisis. That is the only pathway that seems to be the most ecologically, nature-friendly, pathways, transformative pathways for sustainable agriculture. There are a lot of, scientific research and done by the Rodale Institute a very long time, almost 30, 40 years, and they have been actually the principal lead, institution in the regenerative agriculture, as you all, I think you might be knowing that. And now the mainstream agriculture universities and mainstream agriculture research institutions are taking up on that, very aggressively, and that is a very good thing. I want to see, because you know, this is a holy grail of finding a sustainable agriculture for the future. Actually, as a matter of fact, there is no other way to go around, because sustainable agriculture must align with the ecology of the nature, and regenerative agriculture is all about, you know, the ecology of the nature as such.
Thank you very much, sir.
Philosophically.
Let's, yeah,
Yeah.
and forgive me for interrupting you for the interest of time. And actually, Gopi sir is referring to his book, Eco-Sociocentrism, and recently published, and he also delivered a seminar, webinar on it. And so I'm seeing one hand raised, I think Dhruva Bhattarai. I don't see now. If you are here, I'd like to request to put your question. Are you
Yes,
here?
yes, I'm here. Am I audible?
Yeah, yeah.
Hi, my name is Dhruva, and I come from Chitwan, Amadi Valley from Chitwan, and I have a background. We are currently working on a agro-tourism sector. So we are like on a construction of a farm stay where we have regenerative agriculture and tourism side by side. So my question is, because I'm not an agriculturist, and I am a self-learned practitioner, and we are practicing regenerative agriculture here. My question is, as you know, the one of the major issue of hospitality everywhere is the cost of food and beverage, and it is very well connected with agriculture. And although some of the service sector, they are trying to practice farm to table, we are going a little bit ahead by going into a regenerative practice. So we have livestock, and we have agriculture, we have all the vegetable farms and trees and everything over there. It's sort of agroecological practice. My question is regarding the slide that was presented by one of our experts at the beginning, and there was a concept of you can't get more than what you give, and I'm a little bit confused in terms of carbon sequestration, because I understand that you can create carbon out of the thin air, right? And so, what is the concept of you can't get more than what you give? Can we not have, like, can we not create carbon and nitrogen out of the thin air? I mean, is it not a sustainable process? So that is a kind of confusion. I would like like the team to answer, and because we are thinking that we can produce carbon and nitrogen out of thin air, we can convert that into protein, and we can have that in our table. So that is what we are thinking. So I would like to ask this sort of technical question. Thank you.
Okay, I can help clarify that point. There, I think Professor Lal is talking about the soil system itself. So up to now, I mean, most of our productivity, agricultural productivity, is based on land-based farming, right? So the soil is the main medium by which we produce the food. So you see, the moment you convert naturally vegetated area like forest or savanna to agriculture, then you start the depletion process of carbon from the soil. Okay, so the moment you clear the land and start farming, then the soil, the total amount of carbon in the soil gradually becomes depleted because it's being released back to the atmosphere. So ultimately, I mean, when that carbon content, organic carbon content in the soil becomes very low, say less than 1% by weight or by volume, then your productivity of the soil will decline, because all the other soil properties which are needed to support biological activity, life in the soil, and productivity of the soil and crop production depends to a large extent on soil organic matter. Soil organic matter can only come from biological activity and processes within the soil. You cannot directly take it from the atmosphere into the soil. Okay, plants do that job. So if you deplete the soil carbon below a certain level, then you cannot get back the return that you want from the soil, right? In terms of the fertility and the productivity. So I think that's what is being referred to when you say that the soil base or the medium by which we produce our food is like a bank account. So you can, if you keep on withdrawing, you will reach a certain point beyond which you cannot get back the return that you want. In other words, we need to put back into the soil what we remove by harvesting the crop. That's what is meant, I think, in that slide. I hope that clarifies the point.
Dr. Khanal, you are muted.
Yeah, this
Okay, sorry, I was muted. So yeah, thank you very much, panelists, for addressing the questions from the attendees. And thank you, attendees, for thought-provoking questions. And thank you very much, Dr. Subodh Adhikari, for facilitating the question and answer session. So finally, we are less than 25 people when we are at peak. And so let's go towards closing. Finally, I would like to request NAPA Vice President, Dr. Uma Karki, to give closing remarks and vote of thanks. Dr. Karki, please.
before Dr. Karki, just I want to draw attention that I have put Dr. Lal's email in the chat box. So he's in the different time zone. So if you have any direct question to Dr. Lal, please feel free to write email to him. His email address is lal.1@ysu.edu. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good evening, good day, good morning, wherever you are. My greetings to everybody from on behalf of NAPA as well as on behalf of myself. So it was thank you for this webinar committee for inviting such a renowned and wealth of knowledge, wealth of experience person as a speaker for today. So there is a very, very thoughtful and timely topic for not only the climate change, but the livelihood of the all creatures living in the planet. Soil is such a important matter, although we sometimes take for granted food coming and food, farmers are growing food and we are going and buying from the store and not realizing how important soil is and all the component of the soil, biological, chemical, ecosystem aspect, and then the physical properties of the soil. So as a One Health, Dr. Lal just presented within such a short time a comprehensive presentation, very informative. And I would like to thank the speaker, although he's not here. And then our webinar chair, thank you all the panelists, and Dr. Shrestha, Dr. Bajracharya, for your, and Dr. Gimire for your thoughtful question and answer that really brought some perspective on how to deal with the situation of the soil globally as well as in Nepal. So the one of the topic maybe we need to add for the future webinar, the soil when we talk about in Nepal, because of the slopy land, not only just the cover crop and the mulch or the biochar may not be enough. We really need to how to minimize all the flooding and depleting the losing the topsoil every year. Basically, when the monsoon comes, when you look at the river, pretty much all the soil looks like gone to the ocean. So that is one of the very topic that we need to be thinking about and bringing the discussion and supporting the policy. So with that, thank you all. Thank you all the participants for staying this late and then giving the thought. And there are very thoughtful questions, and we really have a again remind ourselves how important the soil is. Although while growing up, pretty much all Nepalese coming and participating here are not new this whole topic, because we grew up pretty much mostly who came from the rural area, grew up in the farm, and familiar ourselves in the farm, but we may not realize all the aspect of all this soil. So with that, I thank you again, everybody, and you have a good day, good night, good morning. With that, I would like to adjourn the meeting. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye-bye.